Pues, estimados alumnos, vamos a empezar esta actividad. Agradezco el tiempo y el apoyo pues, de los maestros de inglés. Es entrando a una institución extranjera, a un hospital extranjero, a un distinguido médico e investigador extranjero. Primero y antes que nada, agradecemos la presencia de la doctora Diana, directora de internacionalización de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de México. Yo creo que le damos un gentil y caluroso aplauso a la doctora. Como saben, la doctora ha implementado distintas estrategias para la internacionalización. Estamos en contacto con Harris State University de Texas para ver si se hacen cosas interesantes y es imprescindible el inglés. Entonces, por lo que ya vi ahorita en la mañana, se hablan inglés varios y próximamente habrá otras oportunidades con Austria y vendrán de la Universidad de Virginia en marzo del próximo año a dar unas capacitaciones de anestesiología. Y recuerden que también viene la doctora Laura Bober de la Universidad de Texas pasado mañana. Entonces estamos con mucha energía y estrategias para la proyección básicamente de ustedes. Agradecemos la visita del doctor Henry Parnavan. Henry, welcome to Toluca City. Feel like a family for enthusiastic Mexican students. Wait a second, sorry. Okay. And we'll read the curriculum vitae of Professor Esri. You can call him Esri. Okay? He likes to be named Esri. He studied internal medicine residency at the University of Massachusetts, Worcester, Massachusetts, with a postdoctoral fellow in cell biology, also from the University of Massachusetts. He studied the clinical internship at Madras Medical College, Chennai, India. And of course, he studied medicine at Madras Medical College in India. Examinations and certifications. The ECFMG certified in January 2009. That's the test to study medicine in USA. You can do it. Medical license from the state medical license in India and from Washington State. Work experience as clinical assistant professor at the Washington State University and teaching. Faculty of Medicine residency in Virginia, Mason Franciscan Health, Tacoma, Washington. Inpatienting hospitalist at Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, Tacoma, Washington. Teaching faculty family medicine residency community health. Clinical interest in translational research and application of basic science to the practice of medicine. Personalized medicine. He has experience with journals as peer reviewer, clinical provider education, patient education, and empowerment, quality improvement and patient safety, committee experience, publications. And here I will tell you a brief history of why is this collaboration with Parnavan. One day, in December 2018, Dr. Irma Socorro, former head of community health here in the School of Medicine, came to me to tell me that Dr. Jose Meneses Calderon, who rests in peace, was urgently looking for me. When I saw Dr. Meneses, he told me that he had an option to treat COVID. His proposal was nitazoxanide. With a little skepticism, I set about reading double-label articles and wrote a couple of protocols to begin our fight against COVID. In this frantic and crazy process, of reading and writing, I came across a preprint by Dr. Esri, in which he discussed the properties of nitazoxanide. So I wrote to him, with the surprise that he wanted to know more about our projects, which we began a fruitful collaboration. Since that year, we have published 3 articles together with students from here, from the School of Medicine, with medical doctors from Toluca and other cities of the state of Mexico. I cannot fail to mention, yesterday was the first time we met in person after 3 years of working together, and I'm sure it will be a rewarding stay. I cannot fail to mention that Dr. Esri, while working at the Washington Hospital, continues to provide remote consultations at night to people from India, which demonstrates the quality of people we have today. Dear students and teachers, just as this history of collaboration began, which I hope will continue and expand, so you can contact anyone in the world, because there are no limits or barriers that can stop your ability, your knowledge, your capacities. Do you know why? Because we are the Faculty of Medicine. We are the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico, and we can do anything we believe in ourselves. Dr. Esri, welcome. Now I will give the microphone to Professor Maya.
Muy buenos días a todos. Estimado doctor Murrieta, muy buenos días. Voy a continuar en inglés. Dear Dr. Padavana, welcome here to the Faculty of Medicine of this wonderful university. As my role in internationalization, I would like to address you students, brilliant students and future physicians, to let you know that this story that we just heard of is inspiring, and I hope you use it in the future. As you just knew, this international relations really can start from my office. Every day I do efforts for merging with other researchers and contacting other universities, and of course bringing our university new opportunities. But really, what I've seen so far is that the longest relations and the strongest relationships really come from 2 people, from 2 persons that start working together and look for each other and trust each other. So many times this bottom-up approach is much more fruitful than the top-down approach from an international office. Of course, I have to tell you that when you come back, please ask for help, and we have a limited budget, but we do have some budget that we can manage to help you, and I want to thank you, Doctor, for coming with by your own means. I also want to tell you guys that I believe, as you know, Mexico and India have shared many things. They have been acknowledged as emerging economies, and in the United States you will find many researchers from Latin America, and as well as many researchers from India and also Asia. So you are starting your careers, and what I would like to tell you is that a good advice is to get into English deeply. We have here Dr. Ignacio look for him and start working on your English abilities. And also try to think globally. Do not forget about your local community, but think about globally. Because health is a global issue. And also try to work on your soft skills, how to build trust, how to build confidence in yourself. We tend to be so insecure sometimes, but work on yourself and believe in yourself. And then you will have these same opportunities. And I think your leader here, Dr. Ugo, is showing you the way of just writing an email, and might as well no one will answer it, but someone will eventually answer the email, and you can start your own relationships and take care of them. Science is not conceivable without a global thinking. So that's my advice to you guys, and thank you very much for inviting me. Have a great 2 days with our guest, and take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you very much.
No, please, no. Tomorrow. Tomorrow is more calm. More rest? More rest? Say cheese. Lo van a dejar solito. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, thank you. First of all, thank you everybody. Thank you, Dr. Hugo, for inviting me, and you guys for hosting me here. As he was saying, we were collaborating for quite a few years, and this is the first time we are meeting in person, and really happy to have had the opportunity to come over here and present this. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about a couple of things that's been going on for the past few years. I'm going to talk about the work that we did together with nitazoxanide and COVID. But more importantly, I wanted to get a framework, as you guys are all coming up, just starting to take careers, open the minds a little bit more towards where the field is heading. Hopefully this talk will help with that. So profits are the holy trinity for the clinician researcher. So you don't have to be a researcher per se, but as a clinician, we are absolutely empowered to do some research to help our patients. So I'm going to be touching on 3 different topics. One is drug repurposing, which is using an existing drug for a different reason, which is what we did with our COVID. Personalized medicine, which is contrary to what we do right now. Right now, everybody gets treated the same. You know, individuals are different. There are multiple genetic issue backgrounds. There are other issues, physical issues, and we don't really use all those information. We just treat everybody the same. If somebody comes in with hypertension, we give them everybody the same medication, first line as per guideline recommendations. So there is a lot more intricacies and thought that needs to be put into that, and I think that's where the field of medicine is heading now with AI and machine learning. And then final is N01 trials, which is a trial in a single patient, and we'll talk about a little bit more in detail for that. And basically all of this above interventions is towards translating. So translating medicines from basic science to the clinic as fast as possible. So a few disclaimers first. I have no financial, unfortunately, or conflict of interest present. These are not considered medical recommendations. They consider the teaching, and all of these views are mine. I'm not affiliated institutions or employers. Just standard disclosure. Overview. Well, I will be talking about drug repurposing and the intricacies that is involved in translational medicine. And a lot of these things, the intricacies are the details, the devil is in the details, and if we don't pay attention to them, we end up with an unsuccessful result. So we'll be talking about 2 examples of repurposed drugs. Both of them in COVID and acute COVID during the pandemic, and one more recently. So this will be 2 case series, and also a personalized medicine N01 trial as a framework for a clinician to treat chronic conditions that does not have treatment at this time. So this is to identify new medications and new treatments for an existing condition. So this will also be a real life example. So briefly, as I talk, translation research is taking a basic science and finding and translating and using it in a clinic, in a patient. And this process is pretty laborious, as you can see. Basic science to public health, there is a lag time of anywhere from 15, 20, even 30 years, unfortunately. And this is hopefully what we try to shrink more and more. So for example, RNA interference, I don't know, you guys are in school now, you may have heard about this. This was first identified as a basic science project in 1998, for which Mello and Fire got the Nobel Prize in 2006. But by the time that finding got anywhere applied to humans, it took 2018 as the first time RNA-based therapeutic was even used in a human. So 20 years right there, right? So classic drug development proceeds in these phases. The first one is the basic science research, where they look at the disease pathology, biology, and then looking at targets and molecules, and then finally going this through phase 1, 2, 3, and finally phase 4 trials. Again, there is a lot of steps, and unfortunately the first couple of steps is where a lot of drugs fail. So 90% of the drugs that a pharmaceutical company is researching doesn't make it through to a patient because of various reasons. So the first thing could be the biology. They may not have enough information or go with incomplete information. The drug may look great in a petri dish, but when you do an animal study or in a human, it may fail. Maybe too much toxicity, there may be side effects. So unfortunately, this is where the cost for developing a drug is in millions of dollars, almost close to a few tens of millions of dollars to $100 million. And so pharmaceutical companies, they want to put their money where they can get recuperate the money. So they want to look at diseases where there are a lot of patients, so there's a lot more opportunity to make money. So unfortunately, small diseases that do not have those criteria, which is economically viable, don't get any work done, unless it is done by independent researchers or funded by public. So one way of overcoming this problem is drug repurposing or drug repositioning in literature. It can be called either, they both mean the same. And what basically this means is that it's an existing drug that's used in the market for something else. So you have already bypassed this first 3 steps. This valley of death, so to speak, in drug development is completely bypassed, and now what we have is a drug that can be easily utilized in a condition. So for drug repurposing to happen, you need to have basically a clinical need or an unmet clinical condition, and where you can try to find drugs that we already have and see which ones of these work. And so these will accelerate your timelines, and as I said, avoid that pitfall. There are more than 8,000 to 15,000, depending on which papers you look at, where these kind of called rare conditions, quote unquote, not really rare. If you combine them all together, it actually becomes pretty significant percentage of your population. They have only 5% of them have an approved drug or a treatment. So you can imagine how many of these patients are basically left as lurch without any adequate treatment. Like I said, for rare diseases, small populations, the economics don't really match out, so they don't get any kind of drug development done. Emerging diseases, this is our classic example is COVID. When COVID first came out, it took 2 years for any particular therapeutic to come out. Paxlovid and all those that we now have, we did not when 2020 when these things were started, and that's where our work in collaboration began. And this is the last but my most important, health equity and social justice. Unfortunately, even in developed countries, we have a drug that's available, it's cost prohibitive, and not the whole world doesn't get access to it or benefit from it. It can take anywhere from 5, 10, or even longer because of patent protections and the way drug development is done these days. For even though we have a treatment on hand, that our population may not be able to get it. So this is where drug repurposing comes in really, really heavily. So the important steps first is to identify a drug. To identify a drug that works for a clinical problem or disease in question. So the first thing is we need to understand the biology of the disease. Without understanding the biology, trying to treat something is going to be difficult. Unless, of course, there are serendipities. By serendipity, I mean a drug that's been used for something else. Patients develop, oh, I felt better when independent something secondary condition that this drug is now helping to treat. So this is human level data. Then these are considered actually pretty good because this is how some of the repurposed candidates are now identified, and I'll show that in the next slide. And the classic mechanisms of screening, clinical gestalt, and computer vision predictions like AI and ML are not coming up, but these are in at least based on what we have right now. These are not great. We don't have good AI models or data to actually predict our response. So the main thing would be any kind of biology, and if we have a drug that can address the biology, and if there's an off-label use or a real-world evidence, those would be our most strongest points for using a repurposed drug. Example is sildenafil. So initially this drug was identified for angina or tried for angina. What happened was that a lot of these patients had erectile dysfunction too, and they found an improvement in that. So actually, it's interestingly, the patients in the trial arm refused to give the medications back at the end of the trial because it was helpful for them. And that's how it got repurposed to, for now, as Viagra, which is like a blockbuster drug for the company. It doesn't really work for angina. This is the story with thalidomide, initially for morning sickness with the disastrous side effects, but it's a therapeutic target for multiple myeloma. Dexamethasone for COVID, and we'll talk about nitazoxanide. There's a lot of other examples in literature if you look carefully. So there are some barriers for drug repurposing which we need to be aware of. First of all is understanding the disease or the disease pathology and pathobiology, because without that, going to the next step is not going to be helpful. And then, how good is our preclinical data? if one lab is publishing for 5 years about a drug, but no other labs is able to replicate it, that's a problem. There could be various reasons for it, but you need to have at least independent verification with several different groups from different places for this to actually work. And we talked about the strongest ones is like off-label data, serendipitous. And biggest thing is pharmacology. So I guess since you're all studying in medicine, pay attention in your pharmacology class. It's really important because the medications are the tools that we use to help heal our patients, or treat our patients. And without understanding how they work, in which condition they work, it's not going to be useful. So, as an example, if an approved indication, the drug works for an approved indication at a certain dosage, it may not work for the same for a different indication. The dose may have to be much higher. The question is, if they're giving 10 times the dose, is it going to be safe anymore? At this point, it may have other side effects that may mask its benefit. So it has to be careful. For example, ivermectin during the pandemic had a big thing. The in vitro study showed it was working great to eliminate the virus. But nobody paid attention to the PK data, which basically was 100 times the dose that a human being can tolerate or use. And so this would be a very poor candidate for repurposing, right? And unfortunately, we did run several trials. If you look around the world, there are multiple clinical trials, tens and tens of trials running with ivermectin. And then there's systemic barriers, and this is where institutions come into play. Patent protections, economics, and during the pandemic, funding. Companies wanted to monopolize the drug, so they did not want to use combinations. And it's still an issue, because if they combine, each company wants their own profit. Unfortunately, cooperating during the pandemic for the first 6-7 months evaporated once people found ways. And so after that, it was basically public, who were interested parties were the ones able to do it. And this was a big issue in rituximab, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. So institutional support is very important. So Dr. Hugo is hopefully will be able to help in these endeavors more in the future, and help have multiple stakeholders cooperate together for the common good. One major thing with repurposed medications is the treatment effect or the strength of the treatment. So remember, we are using a medication for some other purpose, so sometimes the effect may not be absolutely great. It may be only 50% or 30% or 40%. And so sometimes you may have to combine certain medications or treatments together to achieve the best effect possible. And so it can still be mitigated by trial designs, and this is very important to see design the study so that you can actually get the results that you're looking for. And if you don't understand the biology, this becomes a big problem, and I'll allude to that in the next few slides. So during the COVID pandemic, this is a slide out from 2020. This is when I think there's a paper that Dr. Hugo actually saw, and we got in touch. And this was the disease biology, this is understanding that I proposed back in 2020 before we had any information. This was back in February of 2020. This was based on extrapolating information from SARS-CoV-1, which was a similar virus, and we had enough data on that, and trying to draw parallels between the two infections. And I'm happy to say that most of this slide is almost identical. So our understanding of biology at that point was actually pretty spot on. So just briefly, the virus causes lung pathology, but also any viral infection can basically helps the innate immunity in the body, what prevents a viral infection from taking hold. This particular virus, actually SARS-CoV-2, inhibits the innate immunity, and by inhibiting the innate immunity, it replicates more. In patients some patients have good innate immunity, they can suppress the viral infection, and unfortunately other patients do not, and then they get into trouble because by the time the immune system, the adaptive immune system, your T cell response happens, which is 10 to 14 days, there's a lot of virus lying around. The immune system attacks the virus, but attacks the host, and the lungs get damaged, and unfortunately the patients die. So we don't see this anymore because SARS-CoV-2 is not a novel virus anymore. A lot of patients have gotten exposed to it. they've gotten vaccinated to it. And so by this time, our adaptive immune system is already aware, and so we don't have to completely depend on the innate immune system. But there is still an issue for the next slide. This is also on the slide from the same presentation back in 2020. And so I have updated the changes in bread, or what we know now, than before compared to what we knew before. So the spectrum in the disease presentation is asymptomatic or minimal symptoms is because of early control of viral replication. And life-threatening complications happen when they cannot control the initial stages of viral replication. So, and we know this already now. Multiple hundreds of papers have documented this now. So our approach back in 2020 was to identify a combination, and we knew right off the bat that one medication may not be sufficient. Is to identify combination of medications, and the steps we did was find a list of drugs that work in vitro. So this is basic science data, and then see if this is working in a cell culture or in vitro data. And so this is something that we independently verified. And this is actually an experiment that I conducted ourselves. I self-funded so that because we couldn't get a funding for that. So we ended up actually collaborating with the lab, and I funded this work, some of the work. And then assess for double combinations in synergy with multiple medications. And we do a pharmacokinetic analysis, make sure this is actually viable, and look at safety for this. So this was, the first step is biology, the in vitro data. So you can see here, one of the candidates here is nitazoxanide. When you have, this is, the green is basically a virus, infected cells. So at 5 micromolar, basically it's wiped out. So it's a really good antiviral. Same thing with remdesivir. At a lower dose, you have a lot of green cells, which means that's the virus, and the virus is completely wiped out at high concentrations. And remdesivir is also one of the medications we currently use for our COVID patients sometimes. So this was a result of the collaboration with the lab, Lucy from the Wang lab. And so this was a self-funded study, and I'm sorry, it's too small here, but basically the blue shows the amount of virus in the presence of the drug, and the dark blue is viability. So basically you don't want the cells to die. When the drug kills the cells, of course the virus will also be low. So you want to have something that's high viability, but low virus. So the first one is nitazoxanide, and then there is various combinations with different medications, which I won't go into the details, but this is indomethacin, this is mometasone, which is also reducing viability, and multiple other drugs like advocone, which was actually tried in multiple trials and didn't work, and our in vitro data shows it doesn't really work that much. So this is a couple of other medications, but I won't get into more details on this. So one particular candidate that we used to working on was the nitazoxanide, which has good combination that it helps the innate immunity, so upregulates the innate immunity, and then by reducing also has a antiviral effect. So the other part is the pharmacokinetics of the drug was different. So this is the IC50 and IC90. Basically, when IC90 means this is 90% of the virus inhibition at this particular concentration. So if you give a patient nitazoxanide, the current dosing or the approved dosing was twice a day. And unfortunately, most trials use the same dosing. As you can see, the drug goes up and then falls all the way down within the next 4 to 5 hours below the IC90. And then you don't have any antiviral effect. And then the second dose goes up. So this drug basically has a short half-life. So if you're trying to do a trial or use this for treatment, it's not going to work. Or it doesn't work as well as you would want it to. What you want is to have your drug levels always above the IC90, which is what we did in our work. We gave every 6 hours. There is a few other intricacies, but basically it's very important we pay attention to that, because otherwise the trial will be a false negative, right? So you have to make sure that the drug is used for the indication of the right dose at the right time with the right person. That's basically what is personalized medicine. And this data is with Dr. Hugo and the collaboration. As you can see, when we give nitazoxanide, time to discharge, most of the patients get discharged, they get better faster. You can see that survival is good. And this is they get out of the hospital faster. They don't get into the ICU. So in all the parameters, it was an excellent drug. Then why is it not used? The reason is this. So all this is good. We have good data, we have biology, we have the off-label data, we have the pharmacokinetics, but the systemic barriers are the issue. The trial designs for most of these drugs were not bad. Was not good in the sense that they were not using the right dose with the right kinetics. Unfortunately, they also did not have any synergistic because of economic issues. Like the drug company did not want to collaborate and add in the medications. So we could not get support from the drug or from the FDA. Funding was the issue. And then there was a lot of institutional issues and regulatory hurdles, as Dr. Huber knows. So this is why it's not really used this way, but we have other medications. But this drug still has other, it's not out yet. There are still other indications that can be repurposed for. And this is the second one that I wanted to kind of talk about. Remember I said we don't see severe COVID anymore. How many of you people have seen COVID patients in ICU now in the past 6 months, a year? We don't, right? Very few, very, very few. And the reason for that, it's not a novel virus. You have some amount of existing immunity that will help control the disease. But the problem is immunosuppressed patients. So this was a CLL patient. This is in 2023. She's in her 70s. She's also older age group. And she's been vaccinated. She's gotten multiple vaccines, including the booster. But unfortunately, her husband went on a cruise, came back and gave her COVID. And 3 weeks of COVID-19. She's been coughing up, she's been having fevers and worsening symptoms. And at this point, the recommendations is to use dexamethasone. When somebody is hypoxic and beyond the first 10 days, antivirals are not approved by the FDA indication. So she was admitted in the hospital, she was just given dexamethasone for 6 milligrams. And by the time I saw her, this was day 4 or 5, I believe, a little less, almost like a week into it, and she was getting worse every day. She came in regularly from 2 liters, now she's on BiPAP, almost 80% FiO2, breathing really hard, and you can see the X-ray is getting worse. So, the problem here, and the other thing is when they tested the PCR from the nose, she's still having viral replication going on. Usually, by 3 weeks, you should have the viral loads coming down, which means she's not able to control that replication. So this is an example of personalized medicine. You need to see the patient in front of you. Don't just look at recommendations. The trials and recommendations are for an average patient. Remember, when you do an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, you're using an intervention against the placebo, and the idea of an RCT is to look at the average treatment effect in a population. And in any randomized controlled trial, there are a lot of inclusion-exclusion criteria. Up to only 10% of the patients screened actually get admitted into the trial. So right away, this is not the population that you're treating in the clinic. 90% of the people you're going to see in clinic is not this data will not be applicable. So you have to remember, any data you need comes with its own limitations, and need to understand that and use that data accordingly. So in this case, we ended up actually doing something completely different, much to our against our recommendations. But so this is immunosuppressed patients, and there is some data out there that using multiple antivirals will help. So unfortunately, I did not get nitazoxanide because in the US, nitazoxanide is extremely expensive. It's like more than a couple of $1,000s for a treatment course. Again, because it's a single company monopoly and they set the price. But they did at this time, they have Paxlovid and they have remdesivir. So we started treating them with both Paxlovid and remdesivir. And remember, there's 2 things to COVID. One is viral replication, the other one is inflammation. So correcting just one is not going to be sufficient. You need to get both. Because the inflammation is what's killing the patient, right? It's the body's own immune system trying to kill the virus, but as a side effect, killing their own cells. So basically, we used very high dose steroids. Again, 6 milligram of dexamethasone is not high dose. I mean, anybody using in the clinic will know. We had to use pretty significant dose of salmeterol quite frequently. And basically, once we started using this, she started getting better, and within 9 days, she was discharged home on 2 liters. So this is the CT scan of this patient initially, when I first got to see her. You can see diffuse ground glass opacities. There is high density or almost fibrotic changes here. And this is a CT scan from a pulmonologist 3 to 4 months later. You can see it's completely cleared up. And the other thing you hear oftentimes in patients with COVID, especially the advanced COVID, is that once it starts to become fibrotic, see, you can pause it, it's not working. But all these high density, you can see this thickened things considered fibrosis are not reversible. You can see it's not really not. The lungs can remodel. It's just inflammation. So if you treat it right and if you treat it aggressively, you can actually improve the outcomes quite well. So there is a, this slide is this resources for repurposing. If you're interested in repurposing project and a particular patient or a particular condition, where to start? It's a huge, vast biomedical knowledge base right there. There's thousands and thousands, probably million papers. You cannot obviously read everything. So this is some information that you can pull at least a basic idea of which drugs may work in a particular disease or a pathway that you're interested in, and then you can go from there. I'll be happy to help you if you need any help with this. There are some AI/ML tools. I've actually started using some of them, like for example, the ChatGPT is excellent to summarize data. Again, it's not absolutely 100% right. There are a lot of mistakes. So, but sometimes it can give you full information that you may not have otherwise found, and then that's just a starting point for you to do more research. There are other LLMs that can use. There are some AI-specific repurposing tools like TXGNN and KGML, and these are not ready for prime time yet. I mean, it's good to use to see what's out there, but then you have to verify and you see for your own purposes. After that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about personalized medicine. And we did kind of mention about what is personalized medicine, choosing the right drug for the right patient, at the right time, at the right dose, in the correct genetic and epigenetic background. So it's multidimensional instead of the single dimension that we do right now. Patient, that doesn't work, and we know that. The goal for personalized medicine is just not to treat disease, but also to maintain health, in maximize effects and minimize side effects. And the ultimate of personalized medicine is an N-of-1 trial. So generally when we do trials in medicine, we talk about large numbers of patients in a placebo and a treatment arm. An N-of-1 trial is a single patient. The single patient gets multiple treatments that's repeated over time. So in essence, what you're doing is you're running a trial for that patient, for that intervention. Is it working or not? And by repeating these interventions separated in time, you actually you get to see if there is an effect, because if one particular treatment every time you use it's helping, the second treatment is not, repeat the first one, it helps again. So that gives you an idea. This is almost similar to what we do in clinical practice. But in clinical practice, we try something, it works, and then we move on, or we don't need to worry about it. This is more systematic, and actually N-of-1 trial data is considered as good as a randomized controlled trial for that patient in question. And if you have enough N-of-1 trials, you can do a meta-analysis and then draw generalized conclusions. But that's a little bit for a later talk. But I want you to understand that it is actually pretty powerful tool. Of course, it has a lot of resources. You have to invest a lot of time to do it systematically. So that's something that is planned out. It's patient-centric and outcome-oriented. The one criteria for an N-of-1 trial is that it has to be a chronic or a stable condition without adequate treatment. So if you have an adequate treatment, again, you don't have to trial anything. But if you have an acute condition, you cannot really try it again, right? If somebody is sick with COVID, for example, you cannot try the same treatment over again. It's also ethically not correct. If you have a condition treatment that works, you try different ones. You only do this trial when you have therapeutic uncertainty as to whether there is which is the best treatment for this patient. You don't know, then you can try this in a format of an N-of-1 trial. And it's a very collaborative model, it's patient-centric. So both your clinician and the patient is involved in creating this model. So the patient can look up, they are more involved in their own health. They can come back, say, hey doc, I want to try treatment A, treatment B, and you have to listen to the patient and try to work with, collaborate with the patient. This is something different to what most physicians are used to. This is more like a paternalistic act. You say, okay, I'm the doctor, I know what you're going to do for you. But when you involve the patient in their own health, they show much better outcomes because they are involved in their own health more than anybody else. And when you involve them in this decision making, they're more compliant, they will try to follow what's going on. So it's an absolutely great model for these chronic conditions. So there's just an example here. The trial design is basically multiple different trials repeated over a period of time. And to see if it is working, you need to have an outcome. So the outcome has to be measured very regularly. You need the patient to do that. So in a clinical trial, you have a trial coordinator or somebody doing it. Here it's the patient's own responsibility. So you have a scale, for example, if it's pain scale, patient records the pain scale every single day in an app or a note diary or a notebook. So they have to be involved in this process as much as you are. And then you can actually do statistics on that. So the difference between, as I talked about, N of 1 versus regular is that we will repeat the same thing. One important thing with N of 1 trials is it can do anything, any interventions. So this could be supplements, it could be herbal products, it doesn't have to be just drugs, it can be meditation, as long as you have an outcome that can be measured adequately. So this is more multidimensional, holistic approach rather than what we are used to doing right now. And one important thing is it does need informed consent. Like any treatment, you need to inform the patient adequately. Generally, it does not mean an IRB approval if it's purely for this one patient clinical need, because this is basically a clinical treatment that you're using, maybe off-label, maybe something else. But if you're going to do multiple N of 1 trials and you're trying to draw generalized conclusions, then you may need ethics and IRB approval. If there is a doubt, just touch base with the IRB. It's probably safer. Alright, so this is a trial, this is a case study of a personalized N of 1 trial of medicine. So there's a 40-year-old male comes to the clinic with severe abdominal pain, locus to the left side, 7 out of 10, intermittent stabbing pain, 10 out of 10 that makes him almost pass out. Symptoms started a few weeks after painful rash, which is shown here. The area of the rash is no longer painful, although there is some discomfort. Over-the-counter medications, NSAIDs, nothing works. What is the diagnosis you think in this particular case? Anyone wants to? What is this rash? Anyone wants to argue? No? So it's kind of vesicular. It's localized to one area. Yeah, exactly. Who's exhausted? Yeah. So it's zoster. So herpes zoster is, but then herpes zoster should go away, right? It shouldn't have pain this much. So this is actually after zoster, you can get a condition called post-herpetic neuralgia. Basically, zoster is reactivation of chickenpox virus, varicella zoster, because once anybody gets chickenpox, the virus goes to the ganglia and the spinal ganglia and stays forever. It doesn't go away. And then if the immune system gets weakened or whatever, then it can actually reactivate and come up as a dermatomal zoster. So it's around 1 million cases of zoster per year, and almost 1 in 3 patients, adults, can develop zoster during their lifespan. So that's a pretty high number if they're not vaccinated. Risk factors is age, usually is greater than 40. Stress, UV, and immunosuppression. Those things can also reactivate because any of those activates the BGV and spinal ganglia. There is no standard of care treatment for PHN or post-herpetic neuralgia. There's multimodal pain control, medications, neurolalysis, spinal cord stimulator. There's a severe reduction in quality of life. There's economic burden is high, healthcare utilization is high, and patients are miserable, I can tell you that. Working. Can you go to the next slide? So thank you. Actual patient reports, very frustrating, extreme pain, sensitivity to touch, cannot use the arm, electric shock, stabbing, severe burning, constant extreme itching. So this is all from actual patient reports this is a crowdsourced website. I think I had this information off from the repurposed list of medications. Stuff that works around. Basically, patients can go in, put their condition in, and they say what are the treatments they have tried, what are the symptoms, and it's basically collating all that information. At some point, you get enough N numbers to actually help with these treatments. Now this is working. Very good, very good. So, the treatments that were tried, the gabapentin, amitriptyline, opiates, NSAIDs, like lidocaine, all without effect. And as a matter of fact, that patient was me. So this was in the middle of the pandemic. So in 2021, in June, so I was basically working in the hospital. And then during the night, so this was the peak of Delta. So there were a lot of patients from India. They had somehow known my name and they reached out to me just organically. And so I was treating them over the internet remotely. And this was in the night because in India it's 12 hours. So I was up during the day and the night and barely going with 3 to 4 hours of sleep. Plus I was also working on the in vitro, the research and to translate these medicines. So I was doing all 3 things at the same time for a year and a half. Finally my body gave out and I ended up exhausted. So this incapacitated me, I can tell you that. The pain was severe. The pain is like somebody stabbing in the knife in the stomach and twisting it. It made me stop in my tracks. There were days when I was going to see a patient and I just broke out in those full sweat and the patient's like, are you okay, doc? You want to sit down? So it was terrible. So I actually had to take off from my work for some few weeks until I can recover from this. So these are all the classic medications that were tried and none of them worked. And so then it started what is the biology of PHM, right? So I started reading up. So the first hypothesis and what we all think right now is that post-herpes zoster, we basically have scarring and inflammation of the ganglia, and so your nerve is irritated, and because of irritation, basically alters the conduction and causes pain as a side effect. Any mild sensation instead of being labeled as touch is now your nervous system and labeling as pain. So it's just uncontrolled pain. And so all the treatments that we are using, gabapentin, amitriptyline, opiates, and all of this is looking at that particular hypothesis. In this particular case, in my case, none of them worked, or they have very bad side effects because I couldn't work after taking gabapentin. I was like a zombie. I couldn't see patients like that. So I started looking a little bit more into the underlying basic science. So, and that's when things got interesting. So when I looked into the basic science, there were papers as far back as early 1990s, 2000s, early 2000s, where treatment and appropriate dose of antivirals for reduction in pain. So this was my first hope. This was Dr. Gilden's lab, and they specifically worked in Zoster. He's no longer there. But they had a trial where they used IV acyclovir in patients, and up to 40% to 45% of the patients had significant reduction in the pain scale, which is not explainable by our current hypothesis number 1. And then there are other papers that showed that there is viral ganglionitis in PHN patients. So viral replication, like we talked about, we are seeing a common theme here. In COVID-19, virus is there, immune system attacks. The virus is not going away, the immune system keeps attacking, right? Same story here. So basically, the virus is still replicating the spinal ganglia. The immune system is going to attack it and cause inflammation. That inflammation will cause pain. So pain is a symptom. If you're treating just the symptom, it's not going to work. You have to look at what is the underlying cause of this pain. So there was actually some paper shows this virus detectable in the spinal ganglia that's actively replicating. And this, the inflammatory cells are a byproduct of this trying to control this viral replication. And then studies from zoster semiherpety. This is a very rare condition where patients just present with pain. They have no detectable rash, but the condition is still the same. Basically, when what happens in herpes zoster is spinal ganglia, the virus gets activated, it goes down the nerves into the skin. If for whatever reason this process gets interrupted, the vesicles won't form, but virus is still there is still inflammation, there's still pain. This is an extremely difficult condition to identify and treat, because first of all, without rash, we don't even think about zoster. But any dermatomal pain, a localized pain in a dermatome on one side of the body, you need to think about that, because that is easy to treat. With an antiviral, the pain will go away. And so zoster semiherpety is another interesting condition. And VZV DNA is present in the salivary secretions of PHN patients, which is absent in zoster patients without PHN. So that again indicates this viral replication is ongoing in these patients, which is maybe causing pain. And then the final nail in the coffin for the hypothesis one, at least for some patients, is that if you look at the peripheral blood, there's an interferon signature. Remember, I told you interferon is our innate immune response to viral infections. So the interferon signature in the blood tells you that there is ongoing viral replication. So all this information was there in basic science for years, and unfortunately nobody really used that information to help patients with PHN. So actually the hypothesis too that now we are going to make is that some PHN patients have persistence of replication that not controlled and results in inflammation. So what do you think will be the treatment for this case then? Antivirals, right? That's what we did. So first we tried valsiclovir, 1 gram TID. Dosing is important again. Each virus has its own IC50, IC90. So VZV has a slightly higher. So 3 times a day. And the pain went from 7, 8 to 0 within the first 3 days of taking it. Within a week, the pain was completely gone. So great. So I continued to take valsiclovir for a few months. But started having some kidney issues. So valsiclovir gets converted in the body to acyclovir. Acyclovir can precipitate in the kidney tubules. Maybe I wasn't drinking enough water. But there was evidence of, I was looking out for that because acyclovir in high doses can cause tubular damage. So it was something I was actively keeping an eye out because I know that side effect. And 3 months or 4 months later, when we did a urine study with our physician, there was microscopic blood. It wouldn't have manifested without checking it. So if it unchecked, if I kept taking it for up to 2 years, I may end up with kidney damage. But unfortunately, now that I knew there was some damage going on, I could not take this indefinitely. This is going to be a problem. So I tried stopping it, and the pain came back. Again, pretty bad. So then I had start looking at the N1 trial performance, do something else, right? So remember we talked about dexamethasone is used to reduce inflammation. So if inflammation is causing pain, why can't I try that? So I tried. Dexamethasone worked like a charm. Within 2 days, the pain was gone. But again, this was in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of Delta, and I don't want to take steroids because I can suppress this inflammation, but then I will end up getting really bad COVID. Because by this time, I had not gotten COVID yet. I was being very careful. I had not caught the virus at this point, and I think I had probably gotten vaccine at that point. So now what? I cannot take this forever. Maybe for a couple of days, then I had to stop it. Then this is the N1 trial format. We tried multiple different things. So there is some data about vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually important in T cell signaling. So the vitamin D receptor is actually expressed in T cells. And patients with low vitamin D can cause actually inflammatory processes are higher. So when I check my vitamin D levels are low on the lower side, so I start supplementing. B12 also has some effect on the immune system. So I did take that. That helped a little bit. And then I tried herbal supplements. I was desperate at this point. I wanted to get rid of this pain however I could. So I tried Solanum nigrum. That's a herbal a plant that has been shown to have activity against herpes viruses. That worked, but the problem is it also has steroidal components in it that can cause adrenal suppression. So this is not, I couldn't take it for too long, but it has its own side effects. Turmeric. Turmeric is it's a spice that used in Indian cooking a lot. It also has some antiviral, anti-inflammatory effect. This never had any side effects for me. It helped a little bit with the pains. So I said, like, no, I'll take that, right? And then one thing that helped was eating. This is weird. So when I gained 20 pounds in this whole process, by the way, because what was happening was that whenever I eat, or if I get hungry, or if I try to lose weight, the pain would come back, and come back really bad. And then right after eating, after a few hours, it used to get better. Initially, I thought this was maybe just from the food, like dopaminergic, but there was other things. Eating also does something else. Eating is nutrition, and remember, nutrition activates your TAR pathway is your nutritional sensor in the body. So TAR activation. So when you eat, the TAR signal goes up. That's one of the you can actually activate the TAR pathway with leucine. Leucine is an amino acid, and it's a very strong mTOR agonist. It acts right in the pathway. And interestingly, when I started using leucine, it did the same thing as eating. So finally, I could do some work. I could lose some weight because I finally lost some of the weight that I gained during this process. So this also worked. And then there were other medications that also I tried, which didn't really work or they had some issues. Cimetidine. What's cimetidine? Yeah, H2 is one. That's the first H2 inhibitor that was ever identified, 1980s, I think. But interestingly enough, it also has effect on the immunomodulation. So cimetidine can actually activate your immune system, and there are actually some papers in the early 1990s where patients had used it for VZV, for varicella zoster treatment. And so that worked great for me actually. It has to be dosed like 4 or 5 times a day. It's a pain in the ass because you have to take it so frequently. But the pain got better, but then I also had to start getting pains in my joints and other areas. It's like an odd. So it was flaring up or causing like a mild inflammatory problems. It caused tendinitis, so I had to stop that. I couldn't take it anymore. Vilaprazole was another medication. It's actually a PPI, but there is some basic science work that it works in herpes virus body. So I tried that, didn't work at all. It was useless. But so we went through several of these things, and finally this particular fact worked. So I was still using valsiclovir intermittently if the pain gets really bad for a few weeks, and then I would stop that. But after I started the other things, supplements daily, using whenever this time really starts, and currently I'm happy to say I'm pain free after doing all this. So basically the goal, I hope for this talk was that there is nothing called a regular condition. We are all researchers at heart. We are trying to help treat a patient, pay attention, find out what's the underlying problem, investigate further, and I think we can do way more than what we are doing right now. Bridge the gap of 15 to 20 years for translating. We don't have to wait that long. We have information already in our hands. The point is to use them appropriately. Make sure to always have informed consent, risk benefit in repurposing drugs. So that's the first thing. You want to make sure safety is your first priority. For example, first when we identified nitazoxanide back in February or March of 2020, first thing I did was the dose needed to be, like I said, twice the dose. It has to be taken every 6 hours. So I actually tried that dose first to make sure it's safe. It actually is. It just causes some mild diarrhea, but it was very tolerable. Before I put that paper out, I did try that dose and it worked fine for me. So it was safe, and there is enough paper out there to suggest that the safety is it has a pretty safe profile. But always be sure there's a clear separation between clinical practice and research. But you have to be right on that edge where we can do both. So So it's a powerful tool, but power comes responsibility. Make sure that the risks always are calculated. Even supplements have risk, like I just mentioned to you right now. So supplement or just amino acids you would think is not a big issue. Leucine being an mTOR activating has caused worse progression of cancers. So there was a trial where they used leucine to help patients with cachexia, and these patients actually had cancer progression really fast compared to the control group. So even because you're using a therapeutic for indication, everything has an effect on a side effect. So always be aware of the side effects. Make sure safety is priority. Get informed consent. Thank you. And that is my contact. You can scan that.
Does anybody here wants to make a question?
Yes, I have a question. Between like the trials of treatments you have like with drugs, did you have like a detox period of time like to avoid overlapping of the effects?
Excellent question. That's called a washout period in upon trials. You can use a washout, you don't have to, as long as you randomize the treatment order. In my case, I did use some washout periods for certain drugs, but it was unintentional as an intentional. You don't have to. You can, as long as you have randomized the periods, you can actually account for that by during the analysis. Any more questions?
Yes. You mentioned about artificial intelligence being used in research. So, what is the future that you see coming in, in the future for artificial intelligence in research?
Oh, absolutely. I think we are almost there. Right now, artificial intelligence has burgeoned out into an excellent tool. Anybody who's used ChatGPT knows that the amount of information they can digest and summarize and actually understand. Understanding was the domain of humans right now, that's in the domain of machines now. They can definitely do that. I think the issue is how are we using it as a tool to help advance this research. I think in the next few years, it's going to be a big, important contribution to research. What once took us probably like 5-10 years will probably take only a few days with the tools that we have, because it can digest information at rates that a human cannot, and it can give information. I think the human touch may be still required for how to creatively use that information. So I don't think we will become obsolete anytime soon, but it will make our lives much simpler if we embrace it as a tool.
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. I am a pharmacist, and I keep thinking that in this end-to-one approach and for personalized medicine and repurposing of drugs, you're not using the same doses as for other issues or whatever. So I would say that a pharmacist is also would be helpful in the team, because you can then change the route of administration for the dose or the speed in which.
Absolutely. A pharmacist is crucial. It should be done as a team, and I think you need to have the support of the institution with multiple people. And multidisciplinary team is always the best, because more is merrier. And absolutely we need an input from a pharmacist. That will help make things a lot more smoother and get more clinical elements down the line. Yes.
I always wonder how researchers came to the point of that that is for antiparasitic that would be useful for COVID. I mean, how they made a relationship.
So So it's actually serendipity. So if we go back and if I remember correctly, nitazoxanide was used to treat a patient who had cryptosporidiosis, which is an antiparasitic indication. But this patient also had HIV, and incidentally, it was found that the HIV viral loads came down. And so then they started looking at multiple other papers, and there's lots of a dozen papers out there in different viruses, and it acts as a broad spectrum antiviral, which is one of the few drugs that can do that. There's no drugs, most of the time when we have an antiviral, it works on one virus but not the other because it's designed for the virus. Nitazoxanide is somewhat special in the case that it works on the host, not on the virus. Because the host-directed medication, the host response to viral infections is mostly the same, which is interferon response. It's geared by, there are some, of course, specifics for each virus, but the broad spectrum antiviral response, it upregulates, so it works on any number of viruses. Yes?
So, how come you think it's for patients to be willing to participate in this in one trial? Do they feel a lot of doubts, maybe?
I think they would be enthusiastic. Remember, these are patients who have tried available treatments. Nothing is working. So if you're telling them, hey, listen, I don't know which will work for you, which don't, and so you have to be transparent with the patient and tell them the current data, current knowledge is this is what we have. It's limited by what we know, and so if you're willing to try different medications. So this is a format that we would like to try, and you can, if you think somebody said this helps, sure, we can try that too. Whatever works for that patient, for that condition. So it's a collaborative effort, and I think patients will be thrilled to do that. But we don't give them as much of autonomy as I think they should get. So. Thank you. Gracias.
Ya van.